settle in with us for the hour as we unpack why, despite the evidence that diverse teams perform better, that it doesn't quite feel that way. Our guest today will also reveal when diversity matters the most. So let's turn to our speakers. We're very pleased to welcome a senior consultant in NLI's diversity, equity, and inclusion practice, Dr. Paulette Gerkovich. Hello, Paulette.
Hi, Gabe. Great to be here today.
So good to have you. And next, we're joined by the professor in the Department of Psychology at Columbia University, Dr. Valerie Purdie-Greenaway. Hello, Valerie.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all time zones. Good to see you.
Welcome. And leading our discussion today, our co-founder and CEO, Dr. David Rock. Hello, David.
Hey, Gabe. Good to be here with you. Thanks very much. And hi to the 250 or so people with us so far. I know many more on the other platforms and folks joining. Welcome. Thanks very much, Gabe. And Valerie, thanks so much for joining. It's great to get to spend some time with you talking. And Paulette as well. Great to have you with us.
Absolutely.
I have an admission to make, a guilty confession, which is that quite often I use these Fridays as an opportunity to actually talk to people I really want to talk to. And I've been dying to catch up with you, Valerie. So finally get to have an hour with you. You're one of the brightest, smartest people in this whole space and just doing such interesting work. So I'm excited to be here and get to catch up with you. And I know if I'm excited, people often are too. And also my other confession is that I often schedule these topics as things I really want to understand better. And I really want to understand the mechanics of why diverse teams are smarter, but don't feel that way. Really curious to go a few clicks deeper than we already have, and we've gone into it. So I'm excited about the session. But before we do, for those new to NLI, we're an unusual organization. We're actually 23 years old today. It's founded in 1998, operations in 24 countries. At the heart of what we do is original research. We do peer-reviewed academic research that no one else is doing, which is essentially looking at the biological foundations of human challenges in organizations. We then advise organizations, so we don't go for funding from grants. We fund our own research through our consulting and advisory, and advise over 50 of the Fortune 100. And for context, and actually even Valerie wasn't aware of how much we've done in this space because sometimes we're very good at keeping the stuff hidden, but we've been researching deeply the diversity, equity, inclusion space since about 2013. So this will be our 8th year. As opposed to 8th month or something. It's been a long journey, and we've published 8 significant, really serious pieces of research that have informed our practice and actually now informing the practice of thousands of companies. There's our bias work with the SEEDS model, which is really the world's first and still only proper mitigation strategy for bias. We have a big counterintuitive paper on the science of inclusion, a recent paper on the science of speaking up and what that really takes to create a culture of speaking up. Very recent one on perspective taking and the mechanics of that and kind of really digging into what it takes to have empathy and understand others. We have a big one on recruiting and select, a big paper on power, a gender paper, which we'll be talking about in the coming weeks, actually. I think sometime in March, we're going to be digging into the gender research we've done. And then Take the Focus Off Difference it's really an inclusion paper. It looks at the importance of how we need to bring people together more so than create separation. So a lot of different research. If you're familiar with our work, you'll know some of these, that there's a lot more we're doing in DEI, and we're continuing to expand in this and the other areas. But I just want to kind of plant this. Now, what we do as well as our original research, we also kind of tackle every year, we tackle things that we think everyone should have access to, because we keep our papers a little bit more private. And we publish things that we think are really important points of view. And some years back, I think 2016, Heidi Grant, who was then our chief scientist, and I basically got our heads around this question, like, why is it that diverse teams are smarter and in what way? And we published this first piece, and it's become kind of a big piece in not just our work, but widely shared across DEI. And what we wanted to do today was kind of go a few clicks into this question, kind of revisit this question because it's really topical, and kind of really understand this. And my team will put this link in the chat, so you're free to use this article, share it. It's as much public domain as HBR is, so HBR has some requirements, but you can share it and read it and link it and understand it. And I think it's probably one of the most helpful tools I've found for developing buy-in with senior executives of the kind of mechanics of why diversity matters versus the social reasons and the other very good reasons. The actual mechanics is kind of what we've got into. So anyway, let's dig in with that huge preamble. Valerie, let's hear from you first of all. I mean, what are the ways that diverse teams are smarter? Maybe you kick off, and then Paulette, we can add some in there. In what ways are diverse teams actually smarter?
So first of all, thank you. A long preamble is necessary because there's been so much work that has happened in the past, 10 years. I love being part of the neuro leadership community because you're the best in I think in the world, and taking the sort of geeky science that's in our laboratories and then actually making it usable. So thank you for continuing.
Tell us about your lab, because I'm just assuming everyone knows you, and I've got a terrible experience bias already.
Yes.
Tell us about your lab and who you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a psychologist by training, and another way to think about it, it also comes under the rubric of a behavioral scientist. And my laboratory, which is literally in the basement without windows, takes people from all over the United States, all over the world, that are sort of kind of unsuspecting, just want to be part of research. And we try to understand human behavior. My specialty is diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. So I've conducted studies on the impact of diversity on performance. What does performance mean? What does diversity actually look like? We've done research on some of the biological underpinnings of bias, done some work on collective intelligence, both in the world of education and also organizations. But a lot of it really comes from, starting off with companies and saying, what are the problems that organizations are trying to solve? Going to the laboratory where you could look at tight causality and trying to understand the mechanisms, and then trying to, go back into the world and share. So it's busy times, incredible times this past year, but also really important.
Great, that's really helpful. And I've got an image of you in the basement with no light and
no
unsuspecting, freaking unsuspecting executives into telling you what they really think. That's great. Keep up the good work. Paulette, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, I just, from my perspective, is a little bit different. Having done diversity research way back when, including the first study that showed a connection between gender diversity and financial performance. But my confession is I've used so much of this NLI work long before I came to the organization. Headed diversity at a few organizations like McKinsey and Micron Technology. And at Micron particularly, these articles that we're talking about today were what really swayed a leadership team who had no experience with a diversity effort before, that this was an incredibly important thing to do. Of course, these are an organization filled with engineers. But they were really compelled by and ended up putting a lot of energy into the D&I effort, in part because of what they learned from this research. So thank you in many ways.
That's great to know. I'm remiss in introducing both of you formally. I've got such an experience bias of assuming everyone knows you because we've been around for a while. But yeah, Paulette comes to us as a chief diversity officer of many esteemed organizations before working with us and applying the work internally. And then we're so grateful to have you with us, Paulette.
Thank you.
So let's get to the question. With all that background, in what ways are diverse teams smarter? Maybe Valerie, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple ways. I mean, the first way is that diverse teams, people sort of talk about this idea that diverse teams breed innovative thinking. And the reason why that happens is because of cognitive elaboration. What that means is that people are thinking with a greater depth of thought. They are thinking about counterfactuals, like, we should be thinking about this in a different way. They are slowing down, so they're sort of able to sort of absorb information from others. They're engaged in greater perspective taking, where they have to sort of think about a problem from multiple people's perspectives. So there's a lot of benefits, I think, at the sort of cognitive level when you think about, just what makes innovation happen. But the catalyst is diversity. And then there's also these other benefits where people feel included, in the sense that all of us have something about ourselves that's a little bit different, quirky, potentially marginalized, historically discriminated against. And then when you see a group of individuals around you that's a little bit different, it sort of fosters this sense of inclusion, like my perspective or my identity, has something to contribute. So there are those kind of emotional, affective benefits, and then there's also sort of the cognitive benefits. And so this is really kind of at the small, at what we call the micro level, when you're looking at teams and performance.
I want to actually do some cognitive elaboration on cognitive elaboration. I actually haven't heard that term before. I love new terms like that. It reminds me of the concept of spreading activation in the brain, where you've got a network that's kind of active, and then sometimes it's active enough that it starts connecting to other networks. And that kind of happens when you go from, say, thinking about an idea to talking about an idea.
Yes.
Same idea. And when it's just in your head, you sort of see a few things, then you start saying it out loud to a few people, you make broader connections, it spreads. Then now you say it to 100 people, big spreading activation, all these other implications. Is it similar, like the elaboration effect?
Yeah, it's very similar, but it's that people are doing that within this small group. So for example, we're trying to launch a new product. And what you really want is you want to have, at least at the beginning, you want 10 or 15 ideas. Well, what cognitive elaboration means is that you'll come up with those 15 ideas instead of those 5 ideas. And then one kind of generates another, and it generates another. And the question people often ask is, why does that happen? And this is kind of the interesting trick related to diversity. It's not a trick, it's sort of rooted in sort of basic science, which is that if I'm sort of come to a group and I assume that we're all the same, we'll do exactly what we just did at the beginning of this broadcast, right? It's experience bias. You know what I'm thinking, you know what I do, I know what you do. And then you kind of don't sort of slow down and go through all the different sort of cognitive steps. And all that cognitive elaboration means in this context is, if I assume that you know something I don't know, I know something that you don't know, then it starts to allow you to sort of think more deeply, more carefully, think about counterfactuals. And that's kind of what starts that engine of innovation.
Yeah, I know, it's really interesting. I remember when I was doing this research back some years back, that one of the insights that really kind of was helpful to me in sort of understanding it, explaining it, was thinking about team intelligence. And there's a concept called team intelligence that came out of largely MIT, and Anita Woolley, Chris Chabris, and others worked on that, right? And it's a really interesting concept. It turns out that teams have an IQ that is fairly independent of the topic, just like an individual who's smarter tends to be smarter across many things.
Yes.
And teams have that same thing that was independent of content. It was also fairly stable across time, and also fairly stable between teams. So you can have, you have a team that always would win, and a team who always seemed to be number 2. But the big surprise in that research was that the best teams, the smartest teams, as long as the tasks involved some kind of collaboration at all, the best teams actually didn't have the highest average IQ or even individual IQ. It was actually, they were the most inclusive. They didn't use words. They said the most turn taking, the most allowing, they had different language, but it was literally, you needed that aspect. And so team IQ is a real thing. And I think it's been helpful to explain the benefits of diversity at the level of, look, your teams are actually smarter.
Yes.
in a bunch of ways. Yeah, anything you wanna
Absolutely,
add to that? Yeah.
absolutely. And what's great about that, what's so interesting and I think important about that study, and I think about it when I work with organizations, I think about it as I'm always trying to improve the dynamics in my own teams and labs, faculty meetings, is the mechanism there was perspective taking, that I'm sort of thinking about a problem and trying to think about it from others' perspectives that are on that team, and turn taking. So essentially what you're doing is you're creating an egalitarian sort of flat kind of culture. And what's interesting is when you look, and I know, Paulette, you can speak to this, when you look at the research on diversity on boards and how does that impact board performance, it's not just diversity on boards. It's not just women on boards. You also have to create an egalitarian culture. You have to have voice. You have to have turn taking. You have to have people sort of feeling like their say is valuable. And those are the mechanisms that starts to lead the diversity that you're fostering to reap the benefits.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And that's the piece when folks talk about that research that I think is often missed, right? You have to, in some areas, we use the term manage the diversity well, but do exactly the kinds of things you're saying. If you just throw a bunch of diverse folks into a room, give them a task and walk away, having done nothing else, it's not necessarily going to go very well. It's probably going to go quite badly, in fact. But those other things need to be in place. And taking that research around women on boards one step further, the Sloan study that we're actually talking about shows that gender has an impact because women tend to bring some of those other skills. The perspective taking becomes more important, for example, more inclusive in terms of inviting others to share their opinions. So it is that shows just how that one element of diversity can actually impact these softer things that some of the research shows really matters.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
The other piece that really sort of jumped out for me, I think it's worth pointing to is, and I see a lot of questions and comments about the team IQ piece. We may circle back to that, but the other thing that was really interesting to me in the research is that diverse teams that are, and I'm going to add that are inclusive, weren't just better at kind of being factual. That we talked about that in the article. It's not that they were just logical. They were also more creative, but they also would find errors better. So in effect, they were logical, creative, and problem solvers. And that's really all types of thinking. So they were actually smarter in all ways.
Yes.
So some people might just think, well, if we get a diverse team, they'll just be a bit more creative. But it turns out to be a much more robust effect across really all types of thinking. Do you want to speak to that, Valerie?
Absolutely. I think that you essentially what we're doing at this moment is defining and refining cognitive elaboration, right? You are, sort of you're making fewer errors. And the reason why you're making fewer errors is because you are able to look at the same problem from multiple different perspectives. You're sort of slowing down. And so you're using sort of cognitive retrieval. And, the inverse of that is that, and I'm sure we'll get to this, is that, homogeneous teams feel great. And the sort of, and this is a short way to think about it is kind of strong and wrong. And even though that's kind of a strong statement, but homogeneous teams oftentimes are working much more quickly, but they're also they're lacking some of that depth. And so what that means is that they're not always going to perform worse, but that kind of depth of thought and perspective taking that you need, particularly when you're trying to build something new, you're trying to brainstorm, you're trying to think in a different way, which is essential today. I mean, we're in our homes because we're still in the middle of the pandemic, right? So we're still trying to think about how to do less with more, how to think differently. These are the moments where we really need to benefit from the counterfactual thinking, the sort of, the sort of depth of thought, as opposed to kind of the smooth sailing. And I remember working with one organization, and they kind of started, in a really sort of simple way, where, at the beginning of what they were they were designing this particular kind of fabric. And typically what they did is they had the engineers work on it first, and then they had the marketing team come in, they had the sales team come in. And what they did is, before we even build and construct this fabric, we're going to have the salespeople, the marketing people, we're going to have our global team in China, India. We're going to have that diversity from the beginning before we even start to engineer this product. And what that did is they wound up with they would argue that they wound up with a much better product, a much more compelling way to market it. And also they had a big boost in feelings of inclusion and belongingness and voice from the beginning.
That's great. And I just want to pick up on a couple of comments. Diverse teams are smarter, but they need to be inclusive. And if they're not inclusive, you don't get the benefits. It's a really important insight from the research. And there's many studies supporting that. We might do a new piece of writing on that. Like, don't forget the inclusion. We should probably do something on that. But this sort of brings me to a question I've been mulling over, and we talked briefly about this, but is it the diverse teams are always smarter, or are there situations where they're more smarter, or where it's more important, or, should we think homogeneously about diverse teams, or should we think in a diverse way about diverse teams, if I may say that? What are you seeing out there in the research?
Well, so this is I think that this is probably the next most important question, right? There is no condition under which everything works well all the time. And I often think about the sort of stories, the sort of Wild West of Silicon Valley, when you get, your group of friends in a garage, and you can sort of build something really quickly because you all know each other and you know how you think. There are likely conditions where you don't always require diversity in terms of the benefits of performance. And so that leads to the question of, what are the other benefits? The feelings of inclusion, the lower rates of turnover, the idea that your company looks new and fresh and not kind of older and stale. And so what that leads me to think about is the conditions under which I think diversity is incredibly important in terms of reaping performance is when you're trying to troubleshoot, when you're trying to innovate and build something new, when you're thinking about sort of strategy and development. Those are probably the moments where it's more important, and industries that require innovation and change are going to need that more.
That's everyone now.
Which I was about to say, which is essentially everyone. But then there's that other piece, which is that all of the kind of interesting research. I mean, millennials, I hate to say this for those of you that are out there, millennials are now, in their mid 30s, right? That's kind of, they're sort of, definitely part of the workforce. But when you look at millennials, and then you look at the generation below that, Generation Z, they don't think of diversity as a value add. They think of it as sort of an essential criteria to what is new and fresh and innovative. So that leads to those other, the feeling that I can sort of bring my whole self to work.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a good point. Now you kind of segueing here to a question I wanted to ask you as well, and maybe Paulette, you can weigh in on this, but it's a really interesting question. Like, we often get asked, all right, so we need more diversity. So can we get away with just cognitive diversity? What if we are accidentally hiring all from, one gender and one race, but they all think differently? Like, is that okay? And so what do we know about the different types of diversity? And how important is it to have lots of types of diversity to get the benefits of, of the higher team IQ? So what do we know about that?
So, I think about this a lot. I'll start with an unscientific story, and then I'll answer your question. But one of my sort of longtime colleagues, friends, conciliary is a white American. He's Jewish. We visually look differently. But we were trained in the same university with the same advisor. I mean, if you want to know like what I'm thinking, ask that person. And I say that because it's not always the case that visual diversity breeds cognitive diversity. And so I think that you know that we have to be really smart about this. I mean, there's sort of functional diversity, right? And that's when you have people that are coming from different industries. You have demographic diversity, which is what are the sort of demographic characteristics that some are visual, some are invisible. I see this in the chat room. There's sort of value diversity, the idea that people are bringing different sort of values into the workplace. And what the research seems to show, and this is also in a very nice paper from NLI, is that the value of identity diversity and demographic diversity is that more times than not, it brings a sort of a different perspective. It does, you know, it doesn't always, sort of in the case that I sort of shared, but more times than not, it does. The problem is people and most organizations aren't really measuring that. And that kind of leads to the, you know, to me, that this leads to the kinds of, what are you asking at the recruiting hiring phase? Are you asking who is it that fits in? Or are you asking what are we missing and what do we need to add to our group, to our theme? You know, we need to think about culture as additive and not as sort of fitting in. So
yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so I'm sort of saying a lot of different things, but I think to sort of answer your question, one, we need to be much more precise about the kind of diversity we need. Two, I think organizations have known for a long time that functional diversity is important for innovation. But number three, this demographic diversity can also facilitate that kind of functional diversity.
Right. No, we wrote a piece on this. Someone just put it in the chat recently around identity diversity matters. And so we did a piece on the importance of identity diversity. And I love that you started with the counterfactual story, but on average, identity diversity will have some bumps over and above just cognitive diversity. And it's in that piece, we kind of articulate why that happens and how it happens. And there's an effect, there's an important effect. I'm also a bit of a fan of socioeconomic diversity, and maybe you mean that by when you talk about demographic, but
yes,
you know, you need people who've, you know, been successful in their lives, also people who've struggled in their lives, and they see the world really differently.
They see the world. I remember hearing an executive talk about this idea that he grew up in a small area in the Caribbean, and his whole ethos was do what you can with what you have and just make it work. And he was absolutely sort of confident that the sort of, you know, lack of what he didn't have growing up allowed him to be successful when there were all kinds of austerity measures. And he was actually able to flourish and excel because he had a different way of, you know, don't ask for more resources, but do what you have. But my point is, part of leadership is also understanding what is the diversity that you're actually, you know, bringing, because we all have some of that that can sort of contribute to the mix.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been looking to grow our organization quite a bit. We're more than 200 people, and we're starting to really grow and kind of thinking about completely different ways of thinking I want to bring into the organization. And I may hire like an activist who's like really understands activism as a kind of a whole field, and how to organize movements and start movements and make them happen. Because in many ways, we create movements inside companies.
Yes.
So we're looking to sort of build an activist division.
Yes.
That, you know, they're not necessarily neuroscientists, but they understand activism. I'm also thinking kind of musically, like we want to bring in people who just have different kinds of creativity, whether it's music or art or different ways, to just think about how we generate insight in different ways. So we've been thinking about completely different ways of sort of seeing the world and trying to add those to our team to expand.
And you know, another thing I've been thinking a lot about is, you know, the importance of neurodiversity. And you know, in the world of education, people think about it in terms of equity, like we need to be nice and we need to create a more equitable society. But when you think about the value of neurodiversity. When we think about autism, we think about Asperger's, we think about, you know, sort of the what has previously been thought of as limitations, is also another way to contribute to what does the organization benefit from. And so, you know, I think what the most important thing is that there has to be clarity. I have found, and you see this as well, many organizations there's the diversity statement, there's the inclusion statement on the website, but when you sort of really dig in and you ask leaders, what does it mean? What does it look like? What are the different types? When does it work for you? What does diversity look like in this organization? You know, not another organization. You see a lot of blank stares. The sharpness and the precision of what the benefits are for your organization and your industry then help to sort of reap the benefits, because you see a lot of like hand wringing, and I think of it just like you think of any other kind of strategy in the organization.
Right.
You know, you're really making something click for me, Valerie. When I was at TIAA-CREF, we started to focus on recruiting neurodiversity very specifically for two reasons. One, there was a skill set there in the financial arena, just, you know, beyond phenomenal. And secondly, this was a group who could really think about targeting financial products in a way that nobody else could, right? In a way that targeted other neurodiverse individuals. So that became a very formal, concerted effort, which I thought was just fascinating. And to David's point about the activism and, you know, sort of thinking beyond how we typically define diversity, I'm thinking of some of this work by Scott Page. He's a political scientist, right? He's done so much work, and I just love him. But I have to say, one beef I've got is that, you know, he talks about at the end of the day, the fact that what we really want in terms of diversity is cognitive, experiential, temperament, work style, those sorts of diversity. And to your point, Valerie, identity diversity brings that. So we almost use it as a proxy sometimes for bringing, you know, different types of style or thinking diversity. But the one thing I think that piece misses is that whole social justice element. And we are hearing so much from chief diversity officers in the last year that this is becoming part of their job. So we're not just wanting to make this case around diverse teams simply perform better, but this is a social justice issue. Yes. And I think that's something, you know, we really want to start thinking about more deeply as well.
You know, I love that you're saying that. And that kind of goes back to, you know, what is your why? I know in my own laboratory, I started off with the idea that I want to build and craft and cultivate and mentor a future generation of scientists that are not created in my image, that are sort of different in a variety of different ways. And I learned about the sort of intellectual benefits after the fact. And so I was like, wow, my laboratory has, when you look at sort of what is my reputation, it's for developing some of the most creative research. That's my reputation. And it comes from bringing in people that come from very non-traditional backgrounds. And so the issue of social justice also gets tied into, you know, what is the right thing to do? Why do you want to have diversity? But those benefits are still there.
I like what you're saying, and we might move on in a sec to the second piece, but I really like what you're saying, that organizations should be clear on what kinds of diversity really matter to them and why, yes. and come from a really clear place in that. That's interesting. We should do some more research on that, Paulette, for later, and sort of see if we can identify the best companies doing this and what some of the patterns are. I think it's a really interesting point, important point, getting their why right.
Right. And it doesn't have to be the same for every single branch of the same organization, right? You might think about social justice at one phase. You might think about performance benefits on another phase. You know, it really,
depends on the phase.
Every place is different.
So let me summarize before we get to chapter 2. Your diverse teams are smarter. There are points at which that matters the most. It's probably always matters, but there are points at which it matters most is when there's innovation happening, troubleshooting, maybe building a future vision, getting that right, setting strategy. that it's because of cognitive elaboration, people literally thinking more deeply, more widely, more broadly. It's as long as there's inclusion, it's making the team smarter across all types of smarts. So you'd imagine hearing all that your felt experience of diversity would be like, wow, that was great being in that diverse team. We solved much bigger problems, and it would like take off like wildfire. You'd think that diversity would take off like TikTok, everyone has it, but it hasn't, right? And what's going on there? And this brings us sort of to the second topic of today. Why is it that we don't have, diversity everywhere? And there's a lot of ways to think about that and answer that without getting too kind of historical and socio-political. But for, one of the reasons I, believe, and maybe you can challenge me on this, but I think it's just that they literally feel less comfortable. And it's such an interesting point. And in fact, this piece that we wrote summarizes a bunch of different studies showing that the discomfort is actually necessary. That if you're with a diverse and inclusive team and everyone's just absolutely fine and there's no discomfort whatsoever, there's no kind of challenging each other at all, you don't get the same levels of benefits. In other words, people need to feel a little uncomfortable to get the benefits of diversity and inclusion. So Valerie, take us away on this. Start with maybe Paulette, you can share a bit more. I've been gabbering on a bit too much. Why is it that we feel uncomfortable in a diverse team? Tell us what's going on here.
Yeah, I think the maybe a more precise way to think about it is less about why do we feel less uncomfortable in diverse teams, but it's more like why do we feel so comfortable when the team is homogeneous? Because it's not that you feel like there's a massive conflict. It's more that homogeneous teams feel great. I mean, it feels great. I mean, you grew up in the same neighborhood, you went to the same school, there's that really interesting research that shows when people either actually or believe they share the same birthday, even the same birthday month, they think they have something in common. And so it just sort of, I'm a big cyclist, can smooth the chain over really, really, really quickly. The problem is you don't get that cognitive elaboration. So if you start with there is that, homogeneous teams feel great. And it's sort of like closing the door to your office. And it's like, like I could just, some people like, I can just be myself. Okay.
Yeah,
so that takes, and I often feel that, when I'm just amongst a group of, the very esoteric specific branch of psychology I came from, social psychology. It's like, we're all speaking the same language. A, the question is, are you? B, is that the right language? Could you actually benefit from a broader pie? That leads to the second piece, which is, that there is a little bit of sort of tension. I wouldn't call it friction, but I'd call it tension that comes from diverse teams, and what that literally manifests in is sort of like the hesitancy. So who's going to speak first when it's a team meeting? That all of the sort of fluidity where like people are stumbling over each other's words in a meeting or even in a virtual environment. There's worry about offending others. But here's what I will say: when you look at the research, the perception is worse than the reality. So when you ask people ahead of time, when they believe that they're going to be on a diverse team, and they ask, how is that team going to feel like to you? People are more likely to say that there's going to be conflict and it's going to be less fun. Relative to when they're actually on the team, there's much less tension than they predicted that there would be. So one of the reasons why I would argue is that there's kind of like, why isn't diversity just everywhere? Well, at that moment when you're either cultivating, hiring, fostering, you're anticipating more conflict than there actually is.
It's so interesting. So it's not so much that diverse teams are really uncomfortable, it's that we think they could be, and that we are aware that homogeneous teams feel so darn comfy.
Yes.
It's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the idea is even when they don't, I mean, so there can be a shouting match going on, but that's not what you encode and remember. You remember we all went to the same school and just yay us. And so it's part of these kind of biases that are always, part of just how the brain works, and so the sort of tension is less. And also that tension is what slows you down just enough to start, thinking in more in sort of more richer ways.
Interesting. Paulette, you want to weigh in here? Any piece of this, really? There's so much to say, but I want to make sure you get it.
Yeah, no, there is so much. One of the things that's been going through my mind as you're talking is I wonder how much of this does change generationally, Gen Z in particular. So just thinking anecdotally about asking groups, why is diversity important? I'm more and more hearing from Gen Z, because it's fun. I want to work on diverse teams. This is a priority for me when I'm looking for an organization to work with. I need to work with diversity, which is very, very different than, answers that you would hear from different generations, and very different, Valerie, than the research you're talking about, where folks do really anticipate that level of discomfort. Suddenly we're hearing this is something we know we need to have. And it's fun.
Yes.
Right.
But part of the interesting question is, what is that fun and excitement? And part of that fun and excitement is that, you got to do something a little bit differently. You got to show up a little bit.
Retention. Exactly.
You've got me thinking about how powerful that in-group effect is. And you've really changed my whole brain around this. I always thought the effect was that diverse teams are uncomfortable, but it's not. It might just be homogeneous teams are so nice.
I think about this a lot. I mean, I love being on homogeneous. It feels like sometimes it feels like a breath of fresh air, and it feels familiar. But particularly in the world that I live in, which is research, something is amiss if no one's questioning each other. Something is a little bit amiss.
Right, in academia for sure. Same in our company. If everyone agrees, there's no one's paying attention. That's true. I'm thinking about a friend I've had for years, and when we met, we discovered that we'd both lived in like one suburb apart in Sydney. She's also Australian. Fathers had the same job. We went to the same beaches. We were on the same train line every day for 6 years. Never met each other, but went to similar schools. And we became such good friends. We just had so many things in common, and we would, go skiing together, do all this. But it was just because we had this commonality.
Yes.
And it just feels so comfortable. It's interesting. I'm going to have to think more about that.
Yes.
Homogeneous teams feel so good, so we're just drawn to them, and we keep creating them.
Yes.
We've actually helped some companies take out some critical questions from their hiring process in relation to this. So there's one, for example, a professional services firm who, one of their questions was, would I have a beer with this person? And we said, oh, don't ask that, because then you're going to hire people that are similar, that you do feel comfy with.
Yes.
And it was skewing them towards, creating the same homogeneous culture. So,
and the other piece of that that's baked into that assumption is that everyone drinks alcohol, which we know based on religion, and not everybody even does.
I'm Australian, so everyone does.
So no, I do think, and the other thing is that it's I'm thinking back to Paulette, what you were saying, and when you look across almost every industry, where is the diversity, right? The diversity is much greater at the sort of junior levels of the organization, and then there's sort of less and less at the senior ranks. And the argument that people make is that's the pipeline, and that we just need to keep feeding the pipeline. But I actually think this homogeneous fun argument is even more persuasive than the pipeline. That is to say that when you're at the level of leadership, you almost think it's essential to have that, the trust, we're hanging out together, we're spending lots of time together. And so the sort of the drive for homogeneity is just much stronger.
I saw some research on the real breakdown in diversity is the first rung. It's basically all employees, there's good diversity. And as soon as you get to first time manager, the diversity plummets. That's really the place. And so that's an interesting thing. There's a couple of questions. Paulette, do you want to pull out some of the questions and kind of tackle some of these? I know there's some around kind of the metrics. We've got about 5 more minutes. Want to make sure we tackle some of them.
Several people have asked, how do we measure inclusion? So we know how to measure diversity to a certain extent. We typically measure the same things diversity-wise, but more importantly, how do we know we're being inclusive in a way that allows us to benefit from the diversity in the room?
That's a great question. So I'll sort of share a few ideas, and then you know, then from my vantage point, and then maybe the two of you can also chime in. I think, you know, what the normal go-to is are surveys, pulse surveys, and asking questions about people's perceptions of inclusion. I think that's one level. I think that a much more compelling level is to think about networks. And the reasons why is that the networks that people are in tell you both about the diversity of the organization as well as inclusion. So I might be motivated in a survey to say, I feel quite included. But then if you look at who am I connected to, how many steps away from the CEO or CFO am I, who do I actually feel like are being mentors? And you could do it by initials. It doesn't always, there's ways to de-identify network measures. You start to really see how inclusion in terms of the integrative aspects of a person and a team are. The second reason why I think that's compelling is sometimes entire teams are segregated from the rest of the organization, and they're kind of way off somewhere. And so I think that there's this perception of inclusion, how do I feel? And then there's the behavioral elements, which I think that network measures, which are actually they're pretty easy to collect. They're a little bit challenging to analyze, but you know, this is what you do. This is what NLI does. I'm sure you have lots of metrics on this.
Yeah, I mean, the organizational network analysis is a great tool for identifying actual behaviors and what's really happening. I really agree with that. We've played with that a bit. It's such an interesting one. I mean, we think in terms of priorities, habits, and systems.
Yes.
So we've got an assessment of systems now. We call it a coherence analysis, and we actually will measure your systems for inclusion as well as for bias, as well as for the kind of mindset that they're developing. So we have some assessments that come in and literally kind of mystery shop all your talent systems, and we can tell you, hey, this is going to create inclusion, this isn't, this is going to create bias, this isn't. And so it's something we've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. It's become quite popular now. We also look at the level of habits. So we're really interested in, you know, how many times a week did you apply this kind of habit or see this kind of habit happening? So I think there are ways to measure it. I mean, we've always been in the habit activation business more than the measurement business. So it's the last few years we've started measuring, but you know, you can measure some things there. Paulette, do you want to add in there as well?
Yeah, I'm actually reading a couple of things. First of all, I'm so glad that we're talking about this. And one of the things that struck me is this: when you do something like look at behaviors rather than asking folks if they feel included, you're getting around some of the bias that exists based on certain elements of diversity. So we know from the research that women tend to do networking differently, and sometimes not as well when we talk about networking in the sense that we've historically used in organizations, and that men tend to just be better at doing, and using that as a way to advance their career. We know that people of color, and within that African American, Black, Asian, Latinx, network differently or included in networks differently. So that's something that looking at the behaviors and the systems rather than asking folks how they feel about being included will unearth.
Right.
We're also getting other questions, and I think this one is really interesting. How do you balance between diversity and inclusion and preserving the company culture, especially if it's a company culture that you really value?
I want to say one quick thing. I've heard from a number of companies that they were panicked, that senior leaders were panicked that when there was going to be this big work from home thing, that culture would vanish, and they'd be onboarding all these people who never saw an office and they'd have no culture. Turned out to be the opposite. was that what the work from home thing did is actually create a unified culture between a San Francisco office, a Denver office, a New York office. Actually, there's one culture now, and people pick up the social norms through even telephoning, never mind video. They pick up very quickly the social norms. So I think that sometimes culture is different than what you expect. But Valerie, your comment on this, how will it affect culture?
Yeah, well, I think, I've been thinking, I think about this a lot as well, because I sort of, one is that, when you look at the literature, the relationship between diversity and company culture is that when you have a very, very strong company culture, you have sort of, rules, regulations, practices, guidebooks, that it has a very taxing impact, particularly on people that are bringing something different to the table. So there can be this dissonance, if you will, between we want someone who's different and thinks differently, or may look differently, or or comes from a group or perspective that hasn't been represented, and then it's like, but you have to read this guidebook, and we have these policies and practices, and it creates this lack of alignment. So so that is one thing to look out for, is and the question is not to change your company culture. That's what that's for the company to decide, but just to understand that dissonance, and that dissonance can lead to turnover. Right. So I think that's the first thing, is sort of, what is your organizational culture strong or weak? I think the second concept that I've been thinking about is sort of culture add versus culture fit. And the idea around culture add, there's a lot of interesting articles that are starting to come out about this idea of culture add, which is, at the level of hiring, asking the question, rather than, asking a candidate, how do they fit in, or assessing how they fit in, it's sort of starting with your organization and saying, what are we missing? What kind of perspectives and viewpoints need to be added? What do we need to change to make sure that that people that we're bringing in are sort of contributing to the maximum of their ability? And it's sometimes people say, oh, there's like all these like minor shifts, but I actually think that's quite fundamental, because the focus is on the organization and what we need to add, rather than the candidate and how they need to fit in.
That's great. I love culture add versus culture fit. And I think that's what I've been thinking about lately. Like, I need to add some artists and musicians and activists and others to kind of balance out the strong science we've done. I want to wrap up in a minute. Just before we do, I have one closing question for you, Valerie, a really important one. And just, Gabe, could you just throw up the polls? If anyone wants to kind of jump off, just click one of these things so we know how to support you in different ways. But we'll leave that there for a second. But just, Valerie, a closing question for you. What are you inspired by at the moment? What's inspiring you? What are you passionate about?
You always do this to me. We always have these surprise questions that I can't think through. I have to admit that last year has been probably the most difficult in my career, personally and professionally. You think of the death of George Floyd, the elections, the pandemic, just trying every day not to be sick. And I have to say that last March, literally a year ago, I said to myself, diversity is over. No one's gonna care about this anymore. Right. The focus is gonna be on the pandemic.
Felt the same,
and I also thought that that it was gonna become less important, because just preserving, any organization is gonna come to the fore. And what I have found, and what I've been most inspired by, is that I was wrong. And I hate to say that, right? Because I want to be right all the time. But I'm wrong, and many tragedies have happened along the way. But here's what I see. For the first time, I hear organizations saying that social justice and racial justice is important, and it's a priority. We have been asked to give presentations on what an anti-racist culture looks like, and what are the systems of racism that are in place that we need to sort of unearth. And we have seen global diversity sort of really take off. Like, the idea is not to flatten the planet when we're all on Zoom, but really to, how do you leverage the global diversity? And we've been talking about global diversity is beyond, you know, being sensitive to time zones forever. And now people are like, this is really real. So I am inspired that there's a real seriousness about diversity, inclusion, equity, and anti-racism. And I think that really keeps me going. I mean, the kinds of questions that, you know, really seemed thin and anemic before are people are asking personally, organizations are asking, and that I'm inspired by that. I really am.
It's great to see. I felt the same way. I thought that it was the end of DEI for a year or two with survival. And then it's I mean, sort of everything to do with really caring about humans just really came to the fore in powerful ways. And DEI in a huge way, but also, you know, mental health and resilience, all sorts of things. So there's been a lot of moving things. I'm actually writing a piece at the moment about the human spring as opposed to the Arab Spring, that actually there's this kind of uprising of humanity. Look, we do need to wrap up. Valerie, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. As I expected, this was an awesome conversation. Finally,
it went by so fast.
I know. And Paulette as well, thank you so much for all the work you're doing in the team and out there in the world. But Valerie, just amazing to get to chat. Lots and lots of ideas, lots of stuff I want to follow up with you about. And, you know, keep up the incredible work. It's
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you to all of you, and what NLI represents and continues to do. It is not easy work, so thank you.
Finally, it's people paying attention now, which is wonderful. So it's great. Thank you so much.